Hi, I'm Rashonda Cade. This is Reading with Rashonda. We are reading The Escape by William Wells Brown. We are on Act 3, Scene 2, and I told you there was a song in it, and I was supposed to try to figure out how to sing the song, but I forgot, and I didn't. So we're going to go into this song together and see what happens. Act 3, Scene 2 is kind of long. I think that might be all we get to today, but we'll see. All right. Act 3, Scene 2. The kitchen. Slaves at work. Enter Hannah. Hannah. Oh, Cato, do go and tell Mrs. that you don't want to jump the broomstick with me. That's a good man. Do, Cato, 'cause I never can love you. I was only last week that Massa sold my Sammy, and I don't want any other man. Do go tell Mrs. that you don't want me. Cato. No, Hannah, I ain't a gonna tell Mrs. No such thing, 'cause I does want you. And I ain't a gonna tell her I tell a lie for you nor nobody else. There, now you's got it. I don't see why you need to make so much a fuss. I's better looking than Sam, and I is a house servant, and Sam was only a field hand. So you ought to feel proud of a change. So go and do tell Mrs. tell you. Exit Hannah. Cato is still speaking. Hannah needn't try to get me to tell a lie. I ain't a gwine to do it 'cause I don't want her, 'cause I does want her, and I is been wanting her this long time, and soon as Massa sold Sam, I knowed I would get her. Um, Cato's worried about telling lies? Come on now, Cato. We've been here with you on this train. By golly, I is gwine to be a married man. Won't I be happy? Now, if I could only just run away from old Massa and get to Canada with Hannah, then I'd show him who I was. Ah, that reminds me of my song about old Massa in Canada, and I'll sing it for you. I, I don't know who he's talking to. I guess he's talking to himself. He's going to sing it to himself. And honestly, I can't be mad at that. I talk to myself and sing to myself all the time. Um, this is my original hymn. It comed into my head one night when I was fast asleep up under an apple tree looking up at the moon. Now for my song. Um, and then it says Air Dandy Jim. So I guess it's supposed to be to the tune of a song called Dandy Jim, which maybe I could look up and find, but we're going to muddle through this together. Come all ye bondmen far and near, let's put a song in Massa's ear. It's a song for our poor race who were whipped and trampled with disgrace. Then the chorus goes, my old Massa tells me, oh, this is a land of freedom, oh, let's look about and see if it's so, just as Massa tells me, oh. The real question is, am I going to be able to keep singing what I just sang that I just made up? The next verse. I guess I'll just read it. He tells us of that glorious one, I think his name was Washington, how he did fight for liberty to save a threepence tax on tea. Oh, Massa tells me, oh, this is the land of freedom, oh. Let's look about and see if it's so, just as Massa tells me, oh. But now we look about and see that we poor blacks are not so free. We're whipped and thrashed about like fools and have no chance at common schools. My massa tells me, oh, this is a land of freedom, oh. Let's look about and see if it's so, just as massa tells me, oh. They take our wives, insult and mock, and sell our children on the block. They choke us if we say a word and say that niggas shan't be heard. My old massa tells me, oh, this is a land of freedom, oh. Let's look about and see if it's so, just as massa tells me, oh. Our preachers, too, with whip and cord, command obedience in the Lord. They say they learn it from the big book, but for ourselves we dare not look. My old massa tells me, oh, this is a land of freedom, oh. Let's look about and see if it's so, just as massa tells me, oh. There is a country far away, I think they call it Canada, and if we reach Victoria's shore, they say that we are slaves no more. I paused because it didn't tell me to go to the chorus there. but I am going to go to the chorus. My old massa tells me, oh, this is a land of freedom, oh. Let's look about and see if it's so, just as massa tells me, oh. Now haste, all bondmen, let us go and leave this Christian country, oh. Haste to the land of the British Queen, where whips for Negroes are not seen. And it doesn't go back to the chorus anymore. So I'll just keep reading. Now, if we go, we must take the night and never let them come in sight. The bloodhounds will be on our track, and woe to us if they fetch us back. Now, haste, all bondmen, let us go and leave this Christian country, oh. God help us to Victoria's shore, where we are free and slaves no more. Uh, okay, so William Wells Brown uh, wrote songs. This is one of them, a whole entire song to the tune of Dandy Jim, whatever that was. Perhaps it was a song of enslaved people. Perhaps it was a song of masters, a catchy tune of some sort. So William Wells Brown wrote this song so Cato could say that this song came to him in a dream one night while he was under an apple tree looking up at the moon, and a song about fleeing to Canada. Like, that's very layered, and I love that. But also, this song is almost in the purest English, right? So Cato has been speaking in dialect for the entire play. For the entire play, Cato has been in dialect. And in this song that came to him in a dream, is the most beautiful English that one has ever heard, right? So we see a juxtaposition between the language Cato probably uses for himself, if it came to him in a dream, and the language Cato uses around others. Um, I don't, there is a book, and it is called James, and it is by Percival. I'm looking it up on my phone right now. I'm sure Percival is his last name. Might be his first. I'm not sure. Percival is his first name. So there's a novel called James by Percival Everett, and he is a professor somewhere because I looked that up because I wondered about him. I recently read it. The book came out not all that long ago. And anyway, it's language in the book is super interesting. And the book is about the story of Huck Finn, Mark Twain's Huck Finn, as told by Jim. So, anyway, this song made me think of that. And I think also, even if we aren't really looking at the different types of language Cato uses, I think something Brown did really interesting here with this song is to say, even if there's not clarity of language in enslaved people, there is clarity of thought. Please don't get it twisted and think that because they are or were enslaved, that their thoughts um, never went beyond what people said their thoughts could go beyond. Like, this song is calling for all people who are enslaved, far and near. And Cato definitely in here has been like, oh, he's a field hand, so he's no good. I'm a house servant, so I'm better. Light skinned is better. Like, he's talking about all of the things that separated enslaved people. But in the song, which is, in the thoughts, um, and I'm not saying everybody's thoughts were the same. I'm just saying that enslaved people thought and loved and lived and acted beyond whatever confined them. So this is saying, come all ye bondmen far and near. So, like, take off these things that have been making us separate and let's come together. And then it uses the word Christian very ironically. Let's leave this Christian country because, yeah, we know it's not really a Christian country because it talks about the preachers who command obedience with whip and cord. And like Jesus never wanted that. So song is such an interesting juxtaposition between um, dialectical language and what we think of is pure and correct English, although there are lots of Englishes that are spoken out there, American English being one of them. Then there's, African American vernacular English. Like there's a lot of different things we could talk about what a language is, and the juxtaposition between what is in the thought life and the emotional life versus what can be shown, and like what can be shown safely. It is much safer for Cato to shuck and jive and every now and then get in something, a lick or something on his master, than it is for him to really talk about what's on his heart, because that would get him killed. So anyway, that was super interesting with Cato singing this song. And now enter Mrs. Gaines. Mrs. Gaines. Ah, Cato, you're ready, are you? Where is Hannah? Cato. Yes, Mrs. I has been waiting this long. Hannah has been here trying to sway me to tell you that I don't want her, but I told her that you said I must jump the broomstick with her, and I is going to mind you. Okay, that's a whole different story than what he told Hannah. He was like, I'm gonna marry you because I want to. And now he's like, you said I have to marry her, so I'm gonna marry her. And then all this with his saying a couple times, don't make me lie. Dude, you gonna lie. And he's doing it right here. All right, Mrs. Gaines. That's right, Cato. Servants should always mind their masters and mistresses without asking a question. Cato, yes, Mrs. I allers does what you and Master tells me and axes nobody. Enter Hannah. Mrs. Gaines, ah, Hannah, come. We are waiting for you. Nothing can be done till you come. Hannah, oh, Mrs., I don't want to jump the broomstick with Cato. I can't love him. Mrs. G, shut up this moment. Dolly, get the broom. Susan, you take hold of the other end. There. Now hold it a little lower. There. A little higher. There. Now that'll do. Now, Hannah, take hold of Cato's hand. Let Cato take hold of your hand. Hannah, oh, Mrs., do spare me. I don't want to jump the broomstick with Cato. Mrs. G, get the cowhide and follow me to the cellar, and I'll whip you well. I'll let you know how to disobey my orders. Get the cowhide and follow me to the cellar. Exit Mrs. Gaines and Hannah. Oh my gosh, Hannah. So, right, Hannah is saying what is on her mind, what is on her mind and in her emotions. She is saying, I miss my husband that you sold away from me. It's too soon. I don't love Cato. I don't want to be married. Don't make me do this. And in face of those protestations, Mrs. Gaines is like, come on, everybody, get the broomstick. Come on, Cato. Let's grab hands. Let's go and do this. I mean, how would Mrs. Gaines feel? Maybe this is how Mrs. Gaines felt when she married Colonel Gaines, because remember, he's Colonel now. Colonel, 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 Colonel. She said she didn't marry him for love, but like, did she marry him under duress like this? And so while I am salty and will remain salty about the lack of personal bodily autonomy that enslaved people had, I will always be salty about that. Always. I try to remind myself that the plight of being a white woman at this time was not all freedom. I am not excusing anything Mrs. Gaines is doing. I am trying to understand where some of what she is doing is coming from. And it is probably from some of the ways her life has been proscribed. And maybe she's just an evil meanie. Like, that's a possibility too. Layers, y'all, layers and layers and layers. Folks are like, why do you like reading 19th century literature? One, because I do. I like what I like, just like other people like what they like. But come on now, the layers and the layers and the layers of things. And this is so relatable to 21st century life. Like we act like, oh, the 19th century was that long ago. A, it wasn't that long ago. And B, it's not like we can't learn anything from it. And maybe we'll learn something and not repeat things because please, can we stop repeating past mistakes? All right, I'm gonna keep reading. Dolly. Oh, Cato, do go and tell Mrs. that you don't want Hannah. Don't you hear how she's whipping her in the cellar? Do go and tell Mrs. that you don't want Hannah, and then she'll stop whipping her. Oh, Dolly, you really think that's going to happen? That is beautifully naive. Cato, no, Dolly, I ain't going to do no such thing, because if I tell Mrs. that I don't want Hannah, then Mrs. will whip me, and I ain't going to be whipped for her, for you, nor Hannah, nor nobody else. No, I'll jump the broomstick with every woman on this place if Mrs. wants me to before I'll be whipped. Dolly, Cato, if I was in Hannah's place, I'd see you in the bottomless pit before I'd live with you, you great big wall-eyed, empty-headed, knock-kneed fool. You're as mean as your devilish old missus. Mm, that's quite the turnout. Cato, if you don't quit that busting me, Dolly, I'll tell Mrs. as soon as she comes in and she'll whip you. You know she will. Enter Mrs. Gaines and Hannah. Oh, this is Mrs. Gaines. She's fanning herself. Mrs. G fans herself with her handkerchief and appears fatigued. I'm sure she is worn out. It has to be a lot of hard work to whip another human. Mm. Mrs. G, you ought to be ashamed of yourself, Hannah, to make me fatigue myself in this way, to make you do your duty. It's very naughty in you, Hannah. Now, Dolly, you and Susan get the broom and get out in the middle of the room. There, hold it a little lower, a little higher. There, that'll do. Now, I just saw the next words that were coming, made me roll my whole head. Now, remember that this is a solemn occasion. You are going to jump into matrimony. Is she telling them? I'm sorry. She's telling them this is a solemn occasion and that they're about to jump into matrimony. Matrimony, which means nothing, nothing to her. She is forcing them, both of them, to do this against their free will. Cato's going to do anything to not get whipped. Hannah clearly doesn't want to marry him. Mrs. G just whipped the mess out of Hannah. So let's think about how Hannah is feeling right now. Emotionally distraught, physically torn up. She's bloody and beaten in this moment because she didn't want to enter into holy matrimony. And Mrs. Gaines has the unmitigated gall, the temerity, the audacity, the nerve to say, this is a solemn occasion? Oh my gosh, my shirt is really expressing how I feel. So Nathan Pyle is a cartoonist. He does the comic strip um, Strange Planet, which I like. And anyway, this shirt is a screen from one of his comics about people who enjoy reading. And so the top says, sorry, it's keeping my book from falling. The top says the being is fictional, and then let's see if I can pull up the bottom so you can see it. The being is fictional, my anger is real. The being is fictional right now, Mrs. Gaines. My anger is real. All right. I'm going to try to collect myself and keep on reading. Oh, so Mrs. Gaines is talking and she says, now remember that this is a solemn occasion. You are going to jump into matrimony. Now, Cato, take hold of Hannah's hand. There now. Why couldn't you let Cato take hold of your hand before? Now get ready, and when I count to 3, do you jump. Eyes on the broomstick. All ready. 1, 2, 3, and over you go. There. Now you're husband and wife, and if you don't live happy together, it's your own fault, for I am sure there's nothing to hinder it. Now, Hannah, come up to the house and I'll give you some whiskey, and you can make some apple toddy, and you and Cato can have a fine time. Mrs. Gaines. So you have literally whipped Hannah into submission. She is bloody and beaten, downcast, holding the hand of somebody she doesn't want to marry, jumping over the broom, getting married to him, all at your behest. Um, it's not a happy occasion. It's not a religious ceremony. It's all dictatorial that's happening. And then Mrs. Gaines says, if you don't live happy together, it's your own fault. For I am sure there's nothing to hinder it, except for the fact that they didn't want to get married in the first place. And she's like, now, Hannah, come on up to the house. I'll give you some whiskey. You can make some apple toddy, and then you and Cato can have a fine time. So I forced you to my will through whipping you. I made you marry somebody. You are physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually downtrodden. So I will give you some alcohol. And in this state, I want you to make up some alcoholic drinks for you and your new husband, and you two go get it on. Maybe I like reading stuff that makes me mad. Whew. All right. Did I say exit Mrs. Gaines and Hannah? If I didn't, exit Mrs. Gaines and Hannah. Dolly, I tell you what, Susan, when I get married, I's going to have a preacher to marry me. I ain't a gonna to jump the broomstick. That will do for field hands, but house servants ought to be above that. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. So out of this tragic scene, they have watched unfold firsthand. What Dolly has to say is, I'm a house servant, so I should get married by a preacher. Only field hands need this sort of no low count wedding. Mm. Which takes me back to the first line of Cato's song, come all ye bondmen far and near. Let's do this together. Let's not nitpick at the things that separate us, that were put into place intentionally to separate us. Let's not fall into the trap of the man, which we see Dolly falling into. Now, we don't know what Dolly's interior world is like. I'm dismayed. But can you imagine being a 19th century person watching William Wells Brown put on this one man show in the midst of the time of slavery in the US? Can you even imagine how this would help you to understand not just what slavery does to the people who are enslaved, but what it does to everybody? All right, Susan. Well, child, you can't expect anything else from old missus. She come from down in Carolina, from among the poor white trash. She don't know any better. You can't expect nothing more than a jump from a frog. I'm gonna have to use that line. You can't expect nothing more than a jump from a frog. Mrs. says she is one of the aristocracy, but she ain't no more of an aristocracy than I is. Mrs. says she was born with a silver spoon in her mouth. If she was, I wish it had a choked her. That's what I wish. Mrs. wanted to make Linda jump the broomstick with Glenn, but Massa ain't a gonna let Linda jump the broomstick with anybody. He's gonna keep Linda for himself. And we do know he is keeping Melinda for himself. Mm-mm-mm. Dolly, you know Massa took Linda away last night and tell Mrs. that he has sold her and sent her down the river. But I don't believe he has sold her at all. He went over towards the Poplar Farm, and I think Linda is over there now. If she is there, Mrs. will find it out, for she'll tell the Massa last night that if Linda was in the neighborhood, she'd find her. Exit Dolly and Susan. Whew, that is the end of Act 3, Scene 2. We are not going to read Scene 3. That was a wild ride, and I need a moment. So, we are reading The Escape by William Wells Brown. This is Reading with Rashonda. I'm Rashonda Cade. Until next time.